Okay, so I've gone ahead and put out some freezer paper to help with keep the glue kind of in the same area. I've also gone ahead, you might notice that I kind of drew a little bit of, whoops, I kind of outlined where the board should go on my paper along the sides, so I know exactly where I'm going to place it. Because what I'm going to do, I'm going to set aside the paper, and I've gone ahead and I poured glue into like a little extra tub, and I have my foam brush around here. Here we go. Sorry, I can't see the, okay, here we go. And I'm going to start applying glue from the inside out all over. Now you can also use spray adhesive, but you have to work very quickly, and sometimes it's very hard to control, like overdoing it. Although I guess this is hard to control too. So what I do is I like to go back and front, starting from the center and working my way out. Very similar if you've ever like coated canvas with gesso, and I want you to go all the way to that edge. Like so. And then the next part might be a little bit tricky. So wherever it's heavier, you just want like a nice thin layer across all of here. Sometimes I actually like to wait a little bit for the glue to get a little bit tackier before I do the next part. But for the sake of keeping this video shorter, I'm just going to go ahead and go. So yeah, go all the way to that edge, like so. And I am waiting, in case you're wondering, to apply the ties later. If you get any little junk in here, get rid of that, because anything that's additional to your board or your glue could, depending on the material you're using, could show through. So I'm going to set this aside carefully. I'm going to lift this up. I'm going to grab my board. Before I set down my cloth, I want to make sure that this is clean again, so that sometimes, especially if you're working with cloth rather than paper, it's just incredibly difficult to get glue off of it. So go ahead. If you have freezer paper, parchment paper, or my favorite is like the silicone paper you can get sometimes for baking, or in photography sometimes for dry mounting. That is like some of the best paper, and like the glue will just like bead up and peel right off. So clean your surface before you move your book cloth over. I have thankfully already set down, let's see, I already have, so all I'm doing is making sure that this is here. Now one thing you might notice is that my board is definitely curling, and I am actually using really cheap, like the back of a sketchbook kind of board. So if you're using a better quality book board that's a little bit heavier, that should be a lot, if you shouldn't have as much of a problem. Now what I do is I like to burnish it very gently from the inside out to make it as smooth as possible. Ideally you might actually do that first. So this is not looking so hot. So I'm going to work on this for a little while. But you want to burnish this all the way out to the edge until there's no air bubbles. So this will take me a little bit of time. Now, if you do have an air bubble, the trick is to actually just poke a very small hole, very tiny, where your really big bubble is, and kind of work it out towards that hole. Oh no. Okay. Oh well. So I have a couple major ones that I don't really like, and I don't want them there. Oops. And so that has helped me kind of push some of those bigger air bubbles that were trapped out. Okay, so it looks like my last video did not save, but I flipped over the cover and I trimmed off a little bit from each side, leaving a little bit of space between, so I didn't cut the corners right up the edge. So we're going to be folding over the edges like so, by gluing the inside here all the way around with one of the glue brushes. But when we fold in the sides, the corners can get really bulky if we don't do this. So this is usually what's recommended. And we don't go all the way to the end, otherwise the little corner of the book might poke out a little bit. And what I've done is the glue that I'm using is very, very wet. So I've applied it and I'm waiting a few seconds for it to kind of become tackier before I wrap over the edges. So I think I can go ahead and do that now. I typically work from the center out, using my burnisher or my fingers. And usually, especially using book cloth, I don't want that. I don't want glue. So I'm usually very cautious. Because glue sometimes, if you're using cloth rather than a print, it's especially difficult to get out. So I kind of work my way from the center out. And if any of the glue like splooshes over, I kind of pick it up with a napkin or something like that. Now when it comes to like the edges, basically what we'll do is kind of like a pinch and tuck before we do the other side. So if I were you, I would go back and use like your bone folder and kind of smooth this out a little bit. So anywhere where the glue starts to come up, just like kind of pick it up a little bit. And you might be able to use like a rubber eraser or other glue to actually like blot any extra glue up that you have. That's usually considered bad form to have that. Or kind of messy, so maybe try to be a little bit neater than I am here. Now when you go to do the next corners, basically you'll just kind of fold it in, tuck it, before you kind of fold this over. So you might want to like, sometimes, I don't know about tweezers, maybe your awl, use something here to kind of fold that in a little bit. Kind of like a canvas, before you kind of tuck in and fold it over, so that when you do go to glue this down, it's kind of nice and neat and completely covered. So that's what I'll do next, and I will repeat all of that on my other board as well, which this time, because I knew I had a lot of bubbles, I actually just kind of laid it down flat. One of the challenges you might face is that when you go to pinch in the corners, I think it's easier to do it before you add glue so that you can kind of check to make sure that both sides are like pinched in. I mean, I guess you could leave it out a little bit, like in here, but I think it looks better if you just slightly punch it on both sides, because you'll be trying to get those pinched corners in on both sides kind of simultaneously. I don't have the best camera set up here, so I'm going to go ahead and glue this down on both sides.